pan. And any barmaid can be a star maid if she dances with or without a fan. Hooray for Hollywood! When you're terrific if you're even good. Where anyone at all from Shirley Temple to Amy Semple is equally understood. Go out and try your luck, you may be Donald Duck. Hooray for Hollywood!
Good evening, pals and gals. This is Damn You Hollywood, and I am not Robert Winfree. I'm your host for tonight, the mandated reporter and frankly unmortified Mr. Mark Radulich. Robert Winfree is not here with us, not for the usual reasons. He hasn't committed suicide. He isn't standing in protest of a terrible movie. He just didn't know we were doing this, and there wasn't any reason or time to include him. This is an impromptu Damn You Hollywood that I had no intentions of doing, and in fact told several people I wasn't going to do it. But then the man, not Becky Lynch, but the man comes around and he says, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the biggest piece of trash I've ever seen. This is an insult, this is garbage, and I will not have any of it. And when the movie is currently ranking at about 94-95% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, as far as the paid critics go, and, it seems to be beloved by everybody that saw it, yet you have this one voice in the wilderness going, it sucks, you suck, everything sucks, go fuck yourself. This is a man I need to talk to. So I've invited the punchy pugilist, Mr. Toxic Masculinity himself, who's doing double duty tonight. He just recorded a TV party with me for Elseworlds from the Arrowverse crossover. He's back again to talk to us about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So here he is, Mr. Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
I'm Pat Mullin, and if you think he's mortified, you ain't seen nothing yet.
So we're gonna do an official Damn You Hollywood here. We're gonna do all the bits, all the meats. We're gonna do the money. We'll do the Rotten Tomato thing. But before we get into all of that, let me talk to you about Spider-Man, Pat. First, did you read Amazing, Spectacular, Web of, and McFarlane's Spider-Man? Did you read them all? Did you just read one or two of those? Tell me about your history with Spider-Man.
So the first Spider-Man book that I read on a regular basis was Spectacular Spider-Man. At the time, Amazing Spider-Man was coming out, if I'm not mistaken, bi-weekly, whereas Spectacular Spider-Man was still a monthly book. Amazing Spider-Man was the flagship title of the 4 ongoing Spider-Man books at the time I started reading comics, along with Web of Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and Spectacular Spider-Man. So Spectacular was the monthly book, so that was the one I was usually able to get because I wanted to read a lot of comics, but I couldn't get every comic I wanted to read. So there were certain ones I had to stick with, and Spectacular was my regular go-to book. But I did read a little bit of all of them, and eventually, when I got to, collect more, loaded up on a lot of back issues of Amazing Spider-Man.
You have a very defined, framed version of who Peter Parker and his alter ego Spider-Man was. Why don't you, so people can better understand where you're coming from when we eventually get to Into the Spider-Verse, tell us who Spider-Man is. If no one had ever heard of Spider-Man before, and you were pitching him as a character to do something with a TV show or a movie or whatever, pitch what you know Spider-Man to be.
Spider-Man is the story of the quintessential brainy 98-pound weakling from meager beginnings. He's parentless other than an aunt and uncle, so he doesn't actually know his real parents. He's constantly bullied. He's physically inadequate and weak. He has a gift intellectually for science, but that gets him nowhere, being, of course, a teenager, and a teenager in New York City to boot. And just nothing is really good for Peter other than when he excels there, and even that's not good enough. So one day this accident happens that bestows upon him these incredible powers, the human equivalency powers of a spider. And what that allows him to do is initially what anybody else would do. Make a lot of money and get some revenge along the way on everybody who kicks sand in your face. What happens is he neglects to understand that that power also gives him responsibilities, which results in a terrible personal tragedy happening that defines his personal character to the point where he refuses to let that happen to anybody else as long as it's within his now great power. And going forward, we have the adolescence into manhood of this exceptional individual given exceptional abilities despite unexceptional beginnings.
Did you read the... Now, I assume Miles Morales is the Ultimate Spider-Man. Is that correct?
Well, now that there's a whole continuity issue, that's where Miles first came from, is the Ultimate Universe.
That's what I was asking. Okay. Did you read his iteration of Spider-Man?
I read about the first 12 issues of it.
Did you love it or did you hate it?
No, and we'll get into this more. I didn't really so much care that they killed the Ultimate version of Peter Parker off to, sub in Miles, for lack of a better way of doing it. It was the agenda of why it was done that bothered me.
Creating a non-white character.
Pretty much shoehorning somebody in there. But I figured if the writing was solid, I really could get past it. But the writing was just, for lack of a better way to say it, unspectacular.
Since then, they've created 106 other Spider-Men. You have the Gwen Stacy iteration. You have the Ben Reilly iteration. Somewhere out there, Benjamin J. Cologne just had a mini-stroke. You had the Dr. Octopus iteration. And you've had Spider-Man 2099. I think that's all of them. Not counting, obviously the multiverse of Spider-Man, but those are the big ones that I can recall. Did I miss anybody of note?
Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham.
Oh, I used to read that as a kid, as a matter of fact. I loved the Looney Tunes version of Spider-Man. But that being said, are there any other iterations of Spider-Men or Spider-Gals? And you also have the Spider-Woman and then Silk, and oh God, never mind.
Yep.
Go off on a tangent here. Are there any other iterations of Spider-Man that you liked or had an opinion on?
I grew up with not just Spider-Man comic books, but also the TV series adaptations. Which the first one I remember was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Oh yeah.
It pretty lame in hindsight, but still gets Spider-Man as the character. Then there came, and there was an iteration before that was just Spider-Man that I used to rent videotapes of. There was the 1960s Spider-Man series with the very memorable theme song. But then what really was the first defining Spider-Man animated series really ever was the 1990s series that was produced for Fox, which, despite a lot of heavy network censorship for certain things, it did a good, not great job of bringing Spider-Man to life for some people. And later on, I think we got the best animated version, which was the Spectacular Spider-Man series, which I wish would have had more of a shelf life, but Sony didn't want that to happen, so yeah.
There have been 3 modern live-action Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire, who was in 3 films. First one, great. Second one, superior. Third one, no one likes to talk about it. It was a piece of trash. Then there was the Andrew Garfield Skater Boy iteration of Spider-Man, which the second one nearly broke Sony and caused them to get in bed with Marvel and create the third iteration of Spider-Man, which is Tom Holland, the boy wonder Robin to Iron Man's Batman. So I'm just out of curiosity, did any of them live up to Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, or Tobey Maguire live up to what your expectations of Spider-Man, or did they all fail?
there were elements and points where I think Toby clicked. I think the actual look part of it, Holland gets because of his age, and really where Spider-Man should initially be portrayed among the other heroes. And Andrew Garfield just cried a lot.
Okay. So let's shift gears for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about the plot here, as we do on this show. This is the Miles Morales story. This is called Spider-Man. This is called Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. What this is meant to be really is a introduction to the Miles Morales iteration of Spider-Man. With a cast of 4 or 5 other iterations of that character. So we have a teenager. Father's a cop. He goes to a private school. He looks up to his uncle, who is a ne'er-do-well. They go out spray painting. He gets bitten by a spider. He gets spider powers. In this universe, there is another Spider-Man, a traditional Spider-Man played by Chris Pine, who is killed by the Kingpin. Spider-Man, in desperate need of a mentor, finds one in we'll call it a Renew Your Vows. Well, gosh, what was the name of the Spider-Man where he has his own company and he's rich or whatever? That had a specific title to it.
It was called Shitty Brian Michael Bendis Spider-Man.
That's the one. The Brian Michael Bendis Spider-Man, where he's much older, he's middle-aged, and he's split off from Mary Jane, and his company has hit the shitter.
So did his book, ironically.
Through the use of a particle accelerator that the Kingpin is using to find another iteration of his wife and child throughout the multiverse, because apparently they're dead. This Spider-Man...
And that's the thing that Kingpin does. He always, does that stuff.
If you'll allow me to get through the plot, sir. You'll have your moment. This Spider-Man comes into the Miles Morales universe, and they have an adversarial mentorship that occurs. Along the way, we are introduced to the Gwen Stacy iteration of Spider-Man from yet another universe, and as it turns out, after they meet this world's version of Aunt May, that there have been a bunch of different Spider-Men falling into this universe because of this particle accelerator. They meet Spider-Ham, Spider-Noir, and Penny Parker.
Anime Mecha.
Yeah, the anime iteration of this character. They realize that none of them are going to live if they continue to live outside of their own universes. So the object here is to get to the particle accelerator, get it to go in reverse, everyone go home, and then Miles Morales is going to destroy it. Along the way, Miles finds out that his uncle is in fact the Prowler, who is working for the Kingpin, until the Kingpin shoots him. Miles Morales eventually stops being a coward and decides that he's going to live up to his potential and be the Spider-Man that he can be. He takes one of Spider-Man's old suits, he does a little graffiti on it, they have a big fight, everyone goes home, Spider-Man fights the Kingpin, he wins, and we're off and running into the Miles Morales Spider-Man iteration. In a follow-up scene, an extra credit scene, we have the 2099 version of this, who gets one of those gizmos that they have in the Flash show that allows him to jump dimensions. And the first one he jumps to is the 1964 version, where he gets into a pointing contest or pointing fight with that Spider-Man, which my son thought was the funniest scene of the entire movie. Just thought I'd share that. All right. Unless you think there's a bit of this that I woefully skipped and needs to be talked about, Pat, what did you hate about this movie?
Oh, geez, where to begin? So, God, we're just the silliness, the inherent silliness of what they've been doing with Spider-Man and comic books for over the last decade. A lot of it is just depicted right here, where you have all these different variations of Spider-Man that have been given their own books or, blown into something way bigger than they should be, and you basically displace a lot of them into this universe haphazardly. Just so much terrible crap. So they get the older, jaded Spider-Man, which I guess is the Bendis version, that is the one that kind of has the mentorship with Miles. And really, they just make him as completely unlikable as possible. So there's clearly an agenda here. That's part one. They don't want you to like Peter Parker. They don't want you to see Peter Parker as Spider-Man. The only person they want you to see as Spider-Man is Miles Morales. You go into the idea of Spider-Gwen, which is inherently ridiculous and retarded. The fact that it ever got legs is just damning of everything involved with Marvel Comics right now. And you go further and you bring in this Japanese mecha version, the Spider-Ham, which, again, Spider-Ham isolated in its own book is fine. It's, silly. It is what it's meant to be. And now you're playing it all for serious in a... If you like Spider-Man, and I'll get into Sean Garmer with this a little bit too. If you're like me and you grew up and you read Spider-Man comics, and you like Spider-Man for what it was, this is absolute shit on every level. They shit on everything you liked. They replaced it with goofy, silly nonsense that's played not for laughs, really, but as serious. They try to justify it by using elements from the Ultimate Universe, and really, this is just trying to further SJW agendas, and that's what it's all about. And that's why this is a big steaming pile of shit. Among numerous plot holes, bad characterizations of not even Spider-Man, but the Kingpin's characterization is terrible. The Prowler, who is a one-note character that was basically invented so Todd McFarlane could draw something else that looked like Spider-Man with the mask and eyes, which 90% of Todd McFarlane's shit is. Excuses for him to draw stuff that looks like Spider-Man. It's so silly and stupid, and they take elements that almost really to the end of the movie, when you have the stuff that goes on with his dad and his uncle. It's almost bad elements of Spider-Man 3, the movie, where he's having that emotional moment with Sandman where he forgives him, is kind of melded into the climax of this when Spider-Man beats Kingpin, spoiler alert, and they try to just mend fences at the end. It was an incoherent mess all over the place that didn't make any sense. It's literally just trying to, make you see Miles Morales as the only Spider-Man while making you laugh and forget about all the bad plot points by introducing things like Spider-Ham and Nicolas Cage's rendition of Spider-Man Noir.
Let's break this down, okay? I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like part of what's so offensive to you is the or we'll call him the Bendis version of Spider-Man. That this is supposed to be sort of a torn down, almost like the Dark Knight kind of version of Spider-Man. Somebody who, he's seen it all, he's done it all, he's broken up a lot of his relationships. He's sort of a shell of his former self. There was a source material that we did about, I can't remember who was the writer and the artist on this, but there was a Spider-Man a Spider-Man book that had come out after Bendis, and it seemed like they were retreading all of the old Spider-Man tropes. And Ronnie and I got into an argument about that. I wish I could remember who the author was, but I said I don't see any growth in this character. Here is a character who's done all of these things and has been around for decades, and this book takes it all the way back to the beginning again. Which I guess if you're nostalgic for old school Spider-Man is fine, but I like characters that grow and and do carry some angst with them for poor decisions that they've made throughout their life. which I think is what Bendis was trying to do. And you found it distasteful, I'm guessing?
I don't have any issue with, rounding out a character, adding elements like that to them. I have an issue when you go completely the opposite direction and leave, so much out of it with no transition period, really, which is exactly what Bendis did, which I think is the biggest problem that myself and a lot of other people have with his time on Spider-Man. He didn't, gradually show Peter having these issues and breakdowns and changing the attitude. It was just a complete left turn with no development to it, and the very close variation of that, you'll call it, that you see presented in this movie, he's just a dick who takes no joy in anything, is just mopey and grumpy and agitated, and
the way they handle it is they keep doing the gimmick with the comic book covers. Let's go through this one last time, and then they do a quick thing through their timeline, and then they bringing you up to speed with where they are right then. And what you're saying is no, that should have been the movie. Get me to where he is now before you just show up with this character who is nothing like the Spider-Man I've ever seen before, and tell me, well, that's the way he is now, and then walk away. I'm guessing that's where we are.
And the intent there is very clear. They want to make you dislike Peter Parker as Spider-Man, and they want you to view Miles Morales as the Spider-Man. That's it. I don't care who tries to tell me that that's not the case. That's a 100% the very transparent agenda to anybody who wants to see it.
Well, okay, let me play devil's advocate here. As I said to my friends in a recent conversation, I'll play the role of the tree-hugging liberal for this. This was his movie. This was the Miles Morales movie. Sony is intentionally, at least in the animated universe, going with Miles Morales. And depending on what they do with Spider-Man and with Marvel and what other deals get made, this may be the character that shows up in the live-action movies as well. If Peter Parker is slated to stay in the Marvel universe, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So,
I'm betting on that.
So my point being, don't you think it's wise for Sony to put a movie out there that re-educates the audience to prefer Miles Morales, the character that they have control over and will most likely be in more movies, than the character they have zero control over and is currently in another universe?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because nothing they've ever done in terms of animated features has ever had any tie-in value to the live-action properties. They did, and that's just not on the Sony side, that's on the Marvel side as a whole. Planet Hulk was a very good animated feature. Had no inherent value to any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and this was at a time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in full gear.
Sure.
They're not going to tie this into what they did, and if they make a Miles Morales movie, they're going to have to do an origin story because they want to sell that movie to the general public as a whole, majority of whom, if they have seen this movie, are not paying attention to that as what they're going to see in the live-action movie, because you have elements in this like Spider-Ham. And the 1964 Spider-Man cameo at the end, which, why would you think that's not part of this if they're bringing in, Japanese Mecha Spider-Man and Spider-Man Noir and all that crap?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying
it would be a very loose connection at best, but they're going to do an origin story again if they do a Miles Morales movie, which pretty much eliminates anything you would have taken from this into that.
So in other words, why shit on the original Spider-Man to prop up Miles Morales, where you can prop up Miles Morales in his own movie later on, if that's the plan. You didn't have to shit on this version of Spider-Man to do that.
Right, and if you read the initial Miles Morales arc, where he first comes in, and it starts in Ultimate Fallout, it was initially good because he was different, and not just different because he looked different. The characteristics of him were different. He was a very different individual than what we saw from Peter. Still someone you could buy into and read, and, you know, it's... I think that one of the good things they did was that, and one of the only things that they did initially, and I don't think they captured it well in the movie versus the comics, is that Miles is initially a coward, does not want to jump into the role of hero. He's terrified and sick at the idea of doing it. I don't think they touched nearly enough on that in this movie, and was one of the things that made him more tangible to people, because that's a reaction that people would have. And then I think he was developed well, but it didn't follow through in the comics. Here, I don't think they developed him at all well. I think they really did very superficial touches on the character.
Yeah.
And more of his development is just seen because he's not as big a dick as Peter.
They hinged a lot of his desire to be a superhero on having watched Spider-Man die and feeling a moral obligation to pick up the mantle. And they was like, okay, well, that's enough characterization there. Let me set up this next question by saying this. Spider-Man is one of those characters that has wide appeal. He appeals to adults as much as he appeals to children, like intrinsically. Like if you just without any context put a bunch of superheroes in a line and grabbed a bunch of kids and said, "Tell me the one you like the most." Spider-Man, most of them would pick Spider-Man. So there is an argument to be said for, well, what if we made a Spider-Man that was a girl? And I bring that up because it took one of these commercials, like one trailer from a movie that we were seeing earlier this year, where they showed Spider-Gwen, and my daughter instantly fell in love with that character. Knew nothing else about her, except that she was a girl, and she was a Spider-Man. And from that point on, that's all I heard about. Like, if we went into a comic book store, it was like, where's the Spider-Gwen stuff? And this is around the time that she had just seen Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I'm like, hey, the Wasp has her own comic. That's nice. Where's the Spider-Gwen stuff? So, what is your issue specifically with Spider-Gwen?
It's literally a 100% cash grab just to create a female Spider-Man. And on top of that, you use the character of Gwen Stacy, who now has no inherent value really in that her own universe other than she's the hero. Because what Gwen Stacy's always been was something that really... It minimizes her a little bit maybe in some minds, but she was really a very huge plot device for the development of Spider-Man's persona.
Yes, for those that don't know, Green Goblin threw her out a window.
Off a bridge.
Off a bridge.
Yeah. And it's She-Ra. It's literally just, well, this is popular, we're going to do a girl version of it. And it's lame.
You don't see the inherent value with that when I just told you the story of, and I'm not, listen, I am aware of what happened with my daughter. That is why I use that as a thing. But I could have picked from any number of situations where, where girls are looking for, just the same as boys are looking for models and and heroes and archetypes for them to glom onto, as a positive thing. So, you're saying, okay, well, this is just a blatant cash grab. Well, it's all a cash grab. The whole idea is...
Right. This is also one of those ones where, okay, you and I both remember when She-Ra was introduced, right?
Sure, yes.
How long was it after She-Ra was introduced that He-Man basically died in terms of fandom and support?
Probably about a year or so later.
Right, because everybody knew that now there's a female He-Man called She-Ra, and they're just doing this for the sake of creating exactly the same thing on the opposite side. Didn't have a distinct personality, which I'll say at least they've somewhat differentiated the personality of Spider-Gwen. But, there's also been a Spider-Woman who is distinctly different from Spider-Man. there's been another Spider-Woman who's distinctly different from that Spider-Woman. And you didn't need to take a dead character that meant so much to the life of Peter in this universe and then get into the whole alternate universe crap again, which we just spent a lot of time talking about and why it's terrible.
So this is the Korean Hulk argument, which is, listen, you don't need to take an already established character and change his race or his gender. Just invent a new character. Try to come up with something that has got the wide appeal of Spider-Man and go ahead and make it a girl. That's fine. That's your argument?
Which I don't see what's so hard.
Okay. I think it's more of, in a situation like yours where you're coming from such a different place than the majority of people who saw this film. I think it's important for people to understand your side of the argument, that you're not just peeing on it for the sake of being contrarian, that, you have a legitimate point of view. And so I want to make sure that that's spelled out for people. I don't know if I agree with all of it, but I can certainly appreciate where you're coming from. As far as the Korean Hulk goes, given the mantle of who took on the Hulk and what he was to the Hulk before that, I was kind of okay with it. But the greater point of can't we create new wild appeal characters of various races and genders and not just give a girl of the hammer and a Korean the Hulk, and I get it. I get where you guys are coming from.
And it would be one thing if that was just an isolated thing, but again, we saw, Lady Thor, we saw Korean Hulk, we saw Black Girl Iron Man, we see Spider-Gwen. It was very clear what the agenda was.
Now, just as an aside, obviously Spider-Gwen has been successful. She has multiple books. She's in a movie. I have to imagine her particular she's got wide appeal, and her sales took off. Korean Hulk, I think they've already done away with. And did Black Girl Iron Man, did that last long? Did that sell?
I stopped reading the Iron Man books. I know they did bring Tony Stark back. Mm-hmm. So I assume no.
Has any of and then Lady Thor's gone too, isn't she?
Yeah.
So none of these worked out except for Spider-Gwen.
Right, and I don't know if Sam Wilson, Falcon, is still Captain America in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. He might be, but I know Steve Rogers is also Captain America again. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, what have we learned, Marvel? Just changing the race or the gender on your established characters is not going to generate sales.
But now here's the thing, and I think you would agree with too. I think of any Marvel character, Spider-Man's always had the most media saturation of any of them. Even during the era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, when all these other characters got play and their movies were much more well-received than the Spider-Man movies that were coming out at the time, Spider-Man was still far and away the easily most recognizable Marvel character.
Sure.
I think that's part of why Spider-Gwen has been successful, is just that it's one of those things where people are into the idea of Spider-Gwen more than they are actually into Spider-Gwen.
People want girls want a girl version of a successful male character.
There's that, and there's, again, the collector market,
mm-hmm.
or there's the market of people who didn't actually read comics who will now start buying it because they saw it and want to, oh, Spider-Gwen, what's this? Okay, I'll check it out. And there's the oddball, odd retailer here or there who, gets the request by a couple people for the book specifically. But it's one of those things where it's just an alternate take on a hot property. And because there's been so much Spider-Man saturation over the years versus pretty much every other Marvel character, Hulk would probably be, your runner-up in that regard. It's one of those things where people will just grab it because, I wonder what this is about. And there's a curiosity factor there, too. But there's also, we'll get to the critical response part of this, too.
Last thing I want to ask you about, two things. One's character related and one's plot related. But you talked about how the Kingpin was mischaracterized in this. Now, in the Daredevil live action show that was just canceled on Netflix, they made a huge hue and cry over Kingpin's relationship with Vanessa. She almost seemed to be his Achilles heel in that everything he did for her, and whatever mistakes he made out of rage when something was happening to her. So there is an established link between his obsession. There is an established obsession with Vanessa, which they were playing to in this movie. The whole reason he's got the super collider that allows for interdimensional travel is he's trying to replace, this dead woman that he's obsessed with and his child. You had a problem with this, which was what exactly?
Not the characterization that he's devoted to his wife. That's always been a part of him.
Okay.
The part of it where it gets silly is that he's creating this super collider and trying to rip an alternate wife and child out of another dimension. That's so far beyond what the Kingpin's characterized as, and so silly and absurd, and just a way for them to, I guess sort of tie in how a spider could get radioactive within the confines of the subway, station that Prowler took Miles Morales to.
So your issue isn't his motivation. Your issue is he doesn't do science fiction-y things.
Really, no, and not on that scale. I think the most science fiction-y things he did in the comics were he had involvement with the creation of, these mechanized robots to try to kill Spider-Man. And when he got mixed up with the supernatural stuff, he never understood it. So he always tried to kind of steer clear of it as much as he could. And you had The Spot. That was about another one where he had a guy who had these portals that he could travel through space with. It was silly, and it didn't last.
I actually remember that.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing, as far as the plot goes, it's a fairly simple plot. Your villain has a thing that's going to blow the universe for a very personal reason. They got to stop it and go home. We've talked a lot about characters, and that seems to be your major gripe with the film. Did you have any issues with the plot?
The motivation of the Kingpin, there's not really a good balance of playing it straight and actually having an emotional struggle when you realize there's an anthropomorphic pig dressed as Spider-Man and Nicolas Cage doing Nicolas Cage things as a black-suited Spider-Man from the 30s. All this silly ridiculousness in it while trying to tell a serious story with emotion, it doesn't work. The one good thing I'll say about this is I loved Crondon, Marvin Jones III, who people know as Tobias Whale from Black Lightning. I loved him being cast in the voice of Tombstone. I thought that was perfect. I thought he did even though his part is not big, I thought he did an awesome job, and his voice was killer for that character.
Look, I enjoyed the movie. My kids enjoyed the movie. My daughter was dancing at the end of the hip-hop music. My son did really well with it. Normally, he gets kind of bored with these things and decides he's going to climb on top of myself or his mother. In this one, he sat still, and, he a couple of times got a little nervous about what was happening. It was pretty intense. But, like I said, the 4-year-old and the almost 8-year-old were thoroughly entertained and enjoyed it. I didn't read the Miles Morales stuff. I knew a little bit about his origin and the connection to the uncle and all of that. But, I liked the adversarial mentorship relationship between Miles and Peter. I did not feel like they were going out of their way to tear him down. I felt like this was a redemption story for that character, so he kind of has to start, worse off for wear. I don't think they gave a character to Spider-Gwen. I just felt she was Skater Goyle, and she was kind of there for my daughter. That's the one place where I really I really felt like, when they were doing character lists, they're like, okay, Miles Morales, he's a this, he's a that, long list of character traits. Okay, Peter B. Parker, long list of character traits. Spider-Gwen, she wears pink. And I feel like that was enough of a characterization. Worked for my daughter, though, so, what can one say? I laugh every time I hear the phrase, "it can get weirder," and Spider-Pig walks out. Like a lot of his best stuff they showed in the trailer. Do animals talk in this universe? I don't want to freak him out. I laughed every time the guy who plays Spider-Man talks in this. The Nicolas Cage stuff with Spider-Man Noir I thought was funny, and I had no use for the Mecha Spider. I was like, oh, of all the spider things that they could have put in this movie, why did they have to put that in? That I had no use for. But like I said, ultimately, I thought it was a very colorful, interesting kids movie. And so I think, there's something that Robert and I talk about all the time is that, just because you're making it for kids, you don't have to make it stupid. I don't think it was stupid, but I did not think it was, I did not think it had a lot of gravitas to it either. I don't think it was trying to, to speak to the nature of man. I think they were doing, Blaxican, not Blaxican, but, Black Puerto Rican Spider-Man. Let's do a Spider-Man story with a bunch of different Spider-Men to appeal to everybody. Let's make this the Poochie the dog of Spider-Man movies, but let's try not to make it terrible. And I think they largely succeeded. In doing that.
I'm gonna read you some quotes from critics, paid critics who do this for a living.
Oh, wait, that's a whole bit we do in this show. You're getting ahead of me. Go ahead, read your quotes.
So, but you're always the one who reads the quotes. I'm gonna do it to you now.
Well, then can we hold off on this and do the money first?
Yes. Okay, we can do the money.
Okay, here we go. Here comes the money.
Surprise, everybody! Radulich wants to talk about money.
Oh, you.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money.
Dollar.
All right. Let's see here. On a budget of $90 million, this thing made $58.6 million. As of this recording, we're recording on a late Tuesday night. As far as the weekend goes, this went up against Mortal Engines, which only me and Ronnie Adams saw. That's set to lose hundreds of $millions and be one of the biggest money losers of the year. So,
And Mule, which only myself and Gavin Napier saw.
There you go. Well, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was the number one movie of the weekend. The Mule debuted at number 2. The Dr. Seuss's The Grinch went from 2 to 3. Ralph Breaks the Internet 1 to 4. Mortal Engines debuted at number 5. Creed fell from 3 to 6. Bohemian Rhapsody, which has made the most money of any musical biopic ever in the history of musical biopics. That's a real thing. Fell from 5 to 7. Instant Family, the new Mark Wahlberg sappy family film, is 6 to 8. Fantastic Beasts and How You Sleep Through It, 4 to 9. Green Book, 7 to 10. Once Upon a Deadpool, which is the PG-13 version of Deadpool 2, debuted at number 11. Rounding out the top 10, we've got The Favorite, Widows, Robin Hood, The Possession of Hannah Grace, A Star is Born, still in the top 20, Mary Queen of Scots, The Nutcracker, Vox Lux, and If Beale Street Could Talk. Just to kind of zip through this really quick, right now for the year, worldwide, we are no movement in the top 4, obviously, but Venom still number 5. It's Sony's biggest hit of the year. Seconded only to Hotel Transylvania 3: Summer Vacation. Venom's made $854 million and is secured at number 5, probably until Aquaman goes skyrocketing up the ranks here. Mission Impossible 6, Deadpool 2, 7. Bohemian Rhapsody has cracked into the top 10. It has shot up the ranks and is making all kinds of money for Fox. Fox is doing late in the game, is doing very well this year. Ant-Man and the Wasp has fallen to number 9. And Fantastic Beasts, Warner Brothers, only entry into the top 10 right now, is sitting at number 10. Ready Player One, whose most of the year was in the top 10, has now sunk to number 11. Rounding out the top 20, Operation Red Sea, Detective Chinatown, The Meg, Hotel Transylvania, Rampage, Mamma Mia, Solo, poor Lucasfilm, A Star is Born, and finally, Dr. Seuss's The Grinch has risen to number 20 for the year with $375 million. Currently, and it doesn't even come out in America until this Friday, but it's already out in China, and it's just killing the business. Aquaman, $266 million. It is making all the money and will probably settle, if it doesn't make $1 billion, it'll probably settle in around $800 million. So the question is, does it beat Venom or doesn't it? We'll find out in the next few weeks. All right. We usually sort of pad the discussion with, how much do you think Spider-Man's going to make? Here's the problem. I think it does okay. I think it makes a decent amount of money. It'll certainly be profitable. Problem is, it's got Mary Poppins, Aquaman, and Bumblebee over the Christmas holiday and New Year's holiday to contend with over the next couple of weeks. So not a lot of time.
And it's an animated feature.
Yeah, and it's an animated feature. So, kids are going on break next week, but that's a lot of movies to see. I don't know if if given if you can only see one movie in the next 2 weeks if you're a kid, your parents have limited time to take you to the movies. I don't know if they're going to pick Spider-Man over Aquaman or Bumblebee for that matter.
Or Bumblebee. Yeah, I was going to say or Bumblebee because of that hype.
Right. Bumblebee is currently doing really well critically. It's looking like the best Transformers movie to date. So, does Spider-Man make its money back? Sure. Does it do much better than that? Hard to say. I think $300 million, between $300 and $400 million is about right for that movie. You got any thoughts on that before we move on?
I think that's probably accurate, optimistically. It's in really tough competition in terms of what it's going in against which that's what you go into in Christmas season. I remember, you're old enough to remember too, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which was based on the very popular at the time Batman animated series, that got released in theaters. And it didn't do anywhere near what they were hoping it would do financially. I don't even think it broke even at the box office, which was a huge disappointment. But I think it was mashed in with like Nightmare Before Christmas and a couple other releases at that time. So that's asking a lot of a movie that's an animated feature based on a cartoon that kids watch at home every week, not something that they can only see in theaters. So I think there's a lot of that involved in this, where there are multiple Spider-Man ongoing cartoons at the moment, and those are all accessible at home on your cable box or your computer, versus something like Bumblebee or Aquaman for that matter, where you're only going to be able to see it either in theaters, or in the case of Aquaman, if you own or rent the Justice League movie at this point.
Yeah, like I said, not everyone's like me who goes to see everything that's in the theaters. You're probably going to see one of those three, and I think the audience is going to be largely split between Aquaman and Bumblebee. Maybe it if it's still in theaters throughout the month of January where there's nothing for kids to watch, maybe that's where it makes the money on the back end. But I think where it does well is when it gets to digital. I think you have a lot of families who will buy the movie when it's available. But I don't think it's going to have a long, successful life in the theaters. All right, we're going to turn the tables, folks. I didn't see this coming, but Pat's going to play me, and I'm going to play Robert Winfree here. He's going to read me some of these fresh reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm going to, I guess, do the Winfree thing of trying not to have a stroke. So here's our theme, and let's do this thing.
Okay.
Hang on.
First,
Are you ready? No! I said, are you ready?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Hit it, baby.
Okay, so our first quote is, Into the Spider-Verse is somehow both the nerdiest and most inviting superhero film in a long time. Every single frame oozes with fan service.
I don't think this was the nerdiest. I feel like the Iron Man movies were kind of nerdier, don't you? At least the first one, which was 90% of it was him building the suit.
Yeah, I think the X-Men movies have some more nerdy quality to them than this does. Also, the every single frame oozes with fan service. I don't think they know what fans of Spider-Man are.
Yeah, no, I would not say this was oozing with fan service.
This was a quote from David Ehrlich of IndieWire, who gave the film a B+.
Okay.
The greatest triumph and biggest surprise of the film is that it is an LSD freakout on par with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay, I'm not as good at this as Robert Winfree is, but that's the most asinine thing I've ever heard. First of all, that is somebody who desperately doesn't want to see superhero movies anymore and is begging for something different to come along. So sure, he can appreciate the wild color scheme of the movie, which I saw in
Mark, how dare you assume the gender of Oliver Jones of the New York Observer?
We saw it in the Dolby Theater here in Florida, and there were times I thought I fucked up and we bought 3D tickets the way that this thing is drawn. But yeah, this is just somebody who hates comic book movies and just wants something different for the sake of being different.
Okay, here's another one for you. Quote, the best standalone film to feature the iconic character so far, with the characterization of Miles Morales more fleshed out than the usual Marvel heroes.
Oh, that's a load of crap, first of all. I think most people agree, even to this day, that the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been on the silver screen is Spider-Man 2 with Dr. Octopus. I don't know. Do you disagree?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I don't even think this is as good as Homecoming. I thought Homecoming did a really good job of portraying, teenage Spider-Man. So, with the added element of this iteration of Spider-Man, is sort of looking at Iron Man as a mentor. But other than that particular bit of characterization, I thought those two were probably the best Spider-Mans that they've done.
Did you think that the characterization of Miles Morales was more fleshed out than the usual Marvel heroes?
No, not by a long shot. I think they've done a great job of fleshing out the core Avenger characters. I thought by the time they got around to the end of the second Guardians movie, all those characters were fleshed out. That's horseshit.
Yeah, this was better fleshed out than like Hawkeye. And then on top of that, to feature the iconic character so far. Well, the iconic character wasn't the feature character. Miles Morales was.
Right. But that goes to your point from earlier that that they so badly want the audience to see Miles Morales as the quintessential Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, let's give you one more here. Okay, let's go with this one. And let's see what your feeling is on this. It captures the sprawling interconnectivity of comic book universes in a way that no other film has.
I mean, how many other movies, though, have dealt with the multiverse?
That's my point.
It's a relatively new concept in terms of film and television. They're just now starting to, look to our earlier discussion of Elseworlds. They're just now starting to deal with this on television and movies. In fact, more so, they're just starting to deal with this on television. They haven't dealt with it before, really, in the movies that I can think of.
Exactly. So what are you comparing it up against that you make that comment? Nothing. Big, fat nothing. What's your closest comparison to this? Superman 2 with the Phantom Zone?
Yeah, and you can't really compare the two. The Phantom Zone wasn't really presented as an alternate universe. If you didn't tell me what the Phantom Zone was, I would have just thought it was, just sort of weird intergalactic prison. Not another dimension. Yeah, do you see why we do this bit every week when we do this show? Do you understand now? It's people.
Yeah. So, of the positive critiques that we've seen from paid critics that we read here, and granted, it is a selected group. It's not every review. It's not. We've largely shot down what they've praised about this film. So I'm going to go to a different aspect here, because basically what inspired Mark to invite me on for this show was a comment I made on Facebook. And just to pull it up for posterity's sake, here's what I said. Into the Spider-Verse is absolute garbage, period. Fire stick or red box it if you're that curious, period. Don't pay for a ticket. And there are specifically 2 comments I will address on this thread. One was from a friend of mine named Linda, and her positive quotation on it was that it was, quote, definitely better than Aquaman. It was creative and different, stylized in a very cool way. I have no issue with the animation. I think if there's a high point to talk about on this, it's that the animation was very crisp, colorful, bright, and very well done. Here's the 2 words that people like to throw out that they think means good. One is creative, and one is different. What's different?
What was so creative about this? It's the story of disparate heroes coming from different parts of the multiverse to take down a big machine.
Well, and now you're getting to part of my point. So I'll start off with the word different. You know what's different? Superman 4 was different.
It sure was.
You know what would be different? Me growing an arm out of my ass. That doesn't mean good. Again, the creative aspect of this, I don't really see it. I don't really see what was so creative about this or so mind-blowing other than they put a bunch of ridiculousness in a standard story with the Spider-Ham and Spider-Man Noir and Mecha Spider.
I'm the positive voice on this, and I didn't think it was particularly original or creative. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was colorful. I thought it was funny at times. Not particularly creative. I've seen this story before. I've seen, again, a bunch of... This was the plot to the Avengers. Disparate heroes coming together to form a team to take down a giant machine.
That was messing with their dimensional well-being.
Yeah, we've done this before. I'm oversimplifying things, but that's kind of the point, that if you strip away a lot of the nonsense, it's, I feel like they purposely, it's something I talk about with Robert all the time, is that you can have a heavily laden plot, or you could have a thin plot so that you can beef up the relationships. This was a movie heavily reliant on relationships. You had the mentorship between Peter Parker and Miles Morales. You had the will they, won't they romantic relationship between Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales. You had the relationship between him and the uncle, the relationship between him and the dad. You had the redemption story, of Peter, finding the hero within again, because he had seemingly lost sight of it, in his old age, as it were. So when you have that much grist for the mill, you don't have a lot of time for complicated plot lines.
Nope. And now we're going to go to one that I really enjoyed. Sean Garmer of 411 Mania, I think he's now for To The Max. Sean's a writer. He was in our community for a long time. And he replied when I put that up that I was one of the very few that didn't like it. And my response was, yeah, but I also like comic books and Spider-Man, unlike most people who've seen it. And this was Sean's response that I took umbrage with. I love Spider-Man. Not a comics person, just don't have a lot of time to read them. I also don't take movies super seriously, though it's a movie. First role of a movie is to entertain you. This did that for me. So guessing it isn't faithful to the comics, question mark. So you love Spider-Man, but you've never read a Spider-Man comic book, and you're not sure that this isn't faithful to the comics. That's what most of this audience is that's praising it. Now, he replied to me, you know, I love Spider-Man from watching the cartoons and watching the movies and more cartoons, but there's no law that says this is how it works. Pretty sure that means there are a ton of things folks couldn't like at all because not reading the original whatever the thing was. And my response was correct. Now, does that mean you have to read every single bit of source material for every single iterage of anything that comes out? No. Now, let's take, for example, I'm trying to think of a movie series that's out that I haven't read the corresponding source material to, where I enjoyed some aspects of the movies. Because I'm not a big, I wasn't a Lord of the Rings guy.
Well, I was. I have actually never read the books.
Okay.
But I love the Lord of the Rings movies. They're my favorite movies. They're probably my favorite franchise of all time.
Right. Now, would you go ahead and call yourself a huge Lord of the Rings fan?
Of the source material? No, obviously I've never read the books. I can only.
That's my point. You would say I love the Lord of the Rings movies,
right.
Not I love the Lord of the Rings.
That is absolutely correct. I cannot say I am a fan of the Lord. I cannot say I am a fan of any of Tolkien's books. I've read none of them. I am a fan of the movies.
Right. Here's one. Okay, I watched Game of Thrones on HBO. Read part of the first book. Did not have the time to read 868 pages without going crazy because of some of George Martin's descriptions of stuff. He doesn't need 3 pages to describe what a chalice looks like before you drink out of it. That's my issue with the book. Not saying anybody who disagrees is wrong, but I would not call myself a huge Game of Thrones fan. I'd say I really love the show, don't know anything about the books or the source material, and I know that the show differs heavily from that. People who are coming out and saying I love Spider-Man, no. You like cartoons, you like a show. You've never read a Spider-Man comic book? Nah, sorry, you're not a Spider-Man lover. You've had, since 1961, these comic books have been published in a weekly format in various instances, and you're such a Spider-Man fan that you've never read them.
This is the argument that Gavin and I, a friend of the show, Gavin Napier, and I get into, and that is, I believe that you can take an established character and evolve that character and do different things with them and challenge them, challenge the reader. Gavin feels that in a lot of those in a lot of the cases where I feel like that's happening, where I would argue that they've evolved the character, he's saying they fundamentally changed who that character is to the point where it's unrecognizable. Now, I think that's debatable per character. I think in some cases Gavin may be right, and I'm being all too forgiving, and I think in other cases, he's way off base, and I'm right. But I think that's where that's the problem that we have in a lot of these situations is that sometimes I don't think we know the difference between evolving a character and fundamentally changing it to the point where it's unrecognizable. And I think a lot of people watch the Spider-Man movie and they look at, the middle-aged Peter B. Parker character and they go, well, it's an evolution on what the character was, while Pat and others would argue, nope, you've made them unrecognizable. That's not Spider-Man. And, that's as good a place as any to end the argument and end the show. I think people who are not as closely tied to the authentic Spider-Man intellectual property are going to be very forgiving of this movie and enjoy it, enjoy it more than I did, because they're not tied to a concept of Spider-Man as they've always known it. Those who are going to struggle with this movie. And I can absolutely sympathize with that point of view. Any last words, Pat?
Yeah, this wasn't good. Don't watch it.
All right. Real quick, go ahead, do your plug for the football podcast and whatever else you got going on these days.
Right, so if you are a fan of the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, you should be all too familiar with the Pigskin Pick'em podcast that is frequented by myself, Jesse Starcher, Jason Teasley, a lot of the regulars here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. We are in a Yahoo-sponsored football pick'em league, and currently I sit atop the leaderboard with both the best overall pick'em record and the best amount of points wagered on the games, which I predicted would happen anyway. So you can go ahead and listen to that. Jesse and myself or another guest will record usually every Wednesday, and the show is out by Friday, Saturday, just before the next week's slate of games. We'll pick our upsets of the week, our favorites of the week, talk about the point changes, and just general NFL news that's happened over the past week. You can go ahead and listen to that. You can go ahead and listen to me on a couple shows with Mark that Mark will tell you about while he does his plugs, because I don't really have too much else going on. I used to be part of a show called The Casual Heroes. I don't think that show is going to record again until we are colonizing Mars.
All right. So Pat and I did double duty tonight. We also did a TV party for Elseworlds, the Arrowverse crossover. Go ahead and check that out. Tomorrow is our Christmas show, Tarja from Spirits and Ghosts and whatnot. Next week, we've got a whole slew of characters on source material to talk about. The second trade of the New 52 Aquaman series, Aquaman Volume 2, The Others. And then we'll be doing a Damn You Hollywood with myself, Robert Winfree, and Alexis Haina for the Aquaman movie. The following week, we've got the Transformers Bumblebees prequel to the movie comic. And then a Damn You Hollywood for the Bumblebee movie, and the Metal Hammer of Doom year-end special. In January, we kick off 2019 with a commentary. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Judgment Night, Pat, but Tuesday, January 8th, we're going to do a commentary track over the Judgment Night movie. Then we're going to review the Judgment Night soundtrack on Metal Hammer of Doom. And then finally, on January 10th, we're going to do an on-trial for Judgment Night. So it's Judgment Night all week long in the beginning of January.
Did you just really ask me if I've ever seen Judgment Night featuring Dennis Leary, Emilio Estevez, Cuba Gooding Jr., Jeremy Piven, and Steven Dorff?
All right, then I'll expect you on the commentary then. Just pencil it in. January 8th, buddy. The following week, we'll be doing a source material for the second volume of Runaway Comics, Runaways, the Complete Series, Volume 2. And then
Isn't that a great song by Real McCoy?
Yes, it is. And then we got a TV party for Runaways Season 2, brought to you by the good people at Marvel and Hulu.
Run away, run away and say goodbye.
I forgot to mention, January 3rd, Alexis Haina joins me for a TV party tonight as we talk about the aforementioned but more modernized love letter to the LGBTQ community, She-Ra, brought to you by the good people at Netflix. Back to the 16th of January, our first Metal Hammer of Doom review proper, that isn't a former album or whatever. It's Soilwork, the new Soilwork album. On January 21st, we've got Penance, the redemption of Speedball, which Jesse's doing for another podcast. We'll be recording that for him. We got a first Damn You Hollywood of the year will be for Glass, the M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong movie featuring the Unbreakable universe. Metal Hammer of Doom reviews Papa Roach, Who Do You Trust, on January 23rd.
God, they're still a thing?
Yeah, they are. And Pat Mullen's going to join me for a TV party tonight for Everywhere You Look. It's Fuller House, season, what are we up to? Season 4.
Yeah, I got to watch that again.
That'll be January 24th. And we close out January with a slew of shows that I know you'll love. We've got the Marv Wolfman, George Perez, first 8 issues of the new Teen Titans.
Am I in on that? I
Yes,
should be, if not.
If you want to be on it, if you want to be in it, you certainly are. And then myself and Ronnie, I believe, will be doing a TV party tonight for the DC Universe live action Titans season 1. Metal Hammer of Doom reviews a pale horse named Death. When the World Becomes Undone, which features some former members of Typo Negative. And from our Canadian office, Andrew Graham and his lovely wife will be joining me to review the 2nd season of The Crown, again brought to you by Netflix. So, that's all of our plugs. I want to wish everyone who listens, who celebrates, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, Pat, for being on with me tonight. Be well, be safe, and behave.
Welcome to the Total Wireless Store, where total confidence awaits.
My wife loves when I DJ our car rides, but overages get in the way of my groove.
Don't worry, you got this with Total Wireless. Right now, get 50% more data when you bring your number to any qualifying service plan starting at $35. All in the nation's best 4G LTE network.
Wiki, 50% more?
Now go find that perfect DJ name.
Miami, discover the Total Wireless stores and get total confidence. The latest phones, the best network, all at great prices. Ends January 2nd, 2019. $35 plans and up. Excludes ports from TracFone Wireless Inc. brands. Terms at TotalWireless.com.
Welcome to the Total Wireless Store, where total confidence awaits.
I am done dealing with data overages.
Don't worry, you got this at the Total Wireless Store. Bring your number and get 15 gigs of data for $50 on the nation's best 4G LTE network. And during our 50% more data promotion, you'll actually get 22.5 gigs for the same price.
22.5 for 50? That's a gig deal.
Data it is.
Discover the Total Wireless stores and get total confidence. The latest phones, the best network, all at great prices. Ends January 2nd, 2019. Excludes ports from TracFone Wireless Inc. brands. Terms at TotalWireless.com.